Hello, church. It's good to come to you at the end of another week, and I pray this finds you doing well. Um, I've had a lot of conversations in the last week or two that I think continue to point to what I named in last week's message about this idea of liminal space. So, if you recall, we talked about liminal space being the space in between one point in time and another, and how often we feel like we're on the verge of something maybe new about to happen in this liminal space. And I kind of compared that to the time that the disciples had post Jesus's death, to the point of maybe Pentecost with the birth of the church, and named how we're in a liminal space. And so I found it interesting that I came across this article from the Northern Virginia Pastoral Counseling Center that also spoke to liminal space. And in it, it talks about liminal space, we choose the chaos of the unconscious over the control of explanations and answers. And part of what I've been hearing a lot over the last 2 weeks is a lot of questions that we don't have answers to yet. And in the midst of those questions, I hear grief, right and good grief. Questions like, when will we return to worship in person? When will we be able to gather together? What will worship look like? How will we be able to do that in a time of social distancing? And we don't have answers to those questions necessarily yet. We don't have firm answers. We have some ideas, but we're still forming and discerning and waiting for guidance on what all that can and needs to look like. But what we do know is that out of this time and space that we find ourselves in, it's going to look different. And it's going to be something perhaps in a way new, as we probably will continue to have, not even probably, we will continue to have a hybrid, a ministry of both online and in person once we're able to be in person. Now, the other thing about this, though, is I think sometimes we can sit in this liminal space and get caught up in the chaos, especially when we find ourselves so isolated. And so this article also talked about how, the ancient mothers and fathers of the church, especially the contemplatives, grounded themselves in spiritual practices to be able to weather the liminal spaces that they found themselves in. And I just keep continuing to encourage you to use this time to ground yourself even more in your faith, to take advantage of the resources that we're providing. There's going to be some new resources in Tuesday's e-message next week. The opportunities that we have for small group and Bible study, for worship, for our midweek prayer service, to continue to work in grounding yourself. And then, of course, having those practices of personal prayer and personal devotion and time with God and time in Scripture. The other thing that was named is a writing from Richard Rohr, who I actually used last week, I think without naming him, as he was the writer of the devotion that I named, that I had used last week, that brought up this idea of liminal space. And Richard Rohr also says, I believe that the cross is an image of our own time. And every time we are invited to gaze upon the image of the crucified Jesus to soften our hearts toward all suffering. Amidst the devastating spread of COVID-19, the cross beckons us to what we would call grief work, holding the mystery of pain, looking right at it, and learning from it. With softened hearts, God leads us to an uncanny and newfound compassion and understanding. I pray that is happening for us in this time, as we shelter in love, not just in place, as we continue to find ways to connect in different ways than we once did, and continue to care for one another and for our community. And let me just end with these words from Julian in Norwich, a saint who lived quite a long while ago, who in her revelation says, "But all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. You shall not be overcome." So friends, let us continue to walk this journey together. Know that I am here, continuing to pray for you, missing you, and here if there's anything that you need. Be at peace and be well.